Okay, it looks like we are live. So let me get started. So I got one question by email about what's going on in the material today. Anyone else, if you have questions as we're going along, please feel free to throw them out, and I will be in the chat and I'll be happy to answer them. But for now, I'll start with the one that I got by email. So the question is, in regards to the Schneck and Snyder court cases, was the difference in judgment of the Supreme Court ruling because Snyder showed no clear intent to harm, their main intent was to gain media attention? This is an interesting question. I think that it's somewhat hard to say. As I mentioned, the two cases were judged by two very different courts at two different very times in the United States. The Schneck case, I'm not sure that the thought was that the intention there was to harm anyone. The issue there wasn't that the flyers being sent out or the leaflets being sent out were causing anyone emotional distress or any kind of harm. The worry is that they were presenting a danger, a clear and present danger that they would create or cause people to break the law, right? And to break laws in particular, which Congress had a right to create, and were preventing significant evils, in particular, or substantive evils, in particular ones related to the war effort, I take it. So I guess you could say that what was happening in Schneck is that the court was ruling that he was intending to cause harm to the country at large, but it's not entirely clear that that's really the big difference here, because I think reasonably you could guess that the Westboro Baptist Church is intending to cause some sort of harm, and maybe of a similar kind even, to undermine people entering the military. In fact, I think very explicitly the Westboro Baptist Church is trying to encourage people not to join the military. So, in a way, they're in fact, they have very similar goals in that respect. But I think the difference here is that, or at least one of the differences here, is that in Snyder, the Westboro Baptist Church isn't trying to encourage anyone to break the law. It's not encouraging anyone to go out and do something which would violate their legal obligations in some way. So that, it's hard to say, but I would guess that that is a big part of the difference in judgment, is that there's no intention to cause violations of the law, and there's no intention to, and there's no likely effect that will occur either. So I think that's probably one of the big differences, yeah. So that's the only question that I have. That's one I got by email. It doesn't look like anyone's watching live right now, so I'm going to check the discussions to see if there's anything there. Doesn't look like it. Okay, I can talk a little bit about the exam from Module 2. Just talk about things that went well and things that went poorly. So let's see here. So, as I said before, on the whole, people did much better on this exam than they did on the first exam, which I'm very happy to see. I'm not sure exactly what the cause. In particular, it seems that people did significantly better on the multiple choice as well as on the essay portion. The greatest improvement was certainly on the essay portion. So everyone, not everyone, but most people did a much better job this time around getting the arguments right, doing some analysis, giving some arguments of their own. So I was really pleased to see that. Several of you, but not a lot of you, opted for the extra credit, and that helped some people. But in general, most of the improvement was from actually doing better on your main essay, which is great to see. Remaining issues with that, there were still some people who didn't do much in the way of analysis and continued to just restate the positions without really any actually, something that came up much more in this exam than in previous was people who didn't use the readings at all. You don't want to do that, right? So you want to make your own arguments. You want to critically analyze the issues at stake in the question, in the essay question that you're answering, but you don't want to ignore the readings completely, because this exam is not just testing your ability to engage in philosophical analysis, but also your ability to incorporate and your comprehension of the text that we read. So the multiple choice can only go so far in finding out how well you understood what's going on in the material, and the essay questions are supposed to supplement that examination. So be sure when you are writing your essays that you get around to including the arguments from the relevant texts that are there. And maybe it was less clear on some of the questions what those relevant texts were, but I felt like I did a pretty good job of making it clear which ones to be talking about and which ones to be focusing on. And of course it's perfectly okay for you to bring in ones that I don't mention, but the ones that I do mention are ones which most clearly relate to the question. So when I say, like, consider the arguments from Mill and Dworkin in your answer, you'll want to, like, reference specifically arguments from Mill and Dworkin in a question that's worded that way. And when I, talk about the market for human organs, all of the material from that sort of portion of the module were things that I would expect you to talk about at least a little bit. Most people did pretty well with that. As I said, the scores were quite good, and the writing was much improved on this one. But as a general matter, one of the biggest mistakes that I found was not talking about the readings enough. So there's a balance to be had, right? You don't want to just restate what the reading said, but on the other hand, you don't want to leave them out entirely. Right? Somewhere in between is the right amount. As far as the multiple choice go, we're still not quite there as far as getting really good average scores. So let me look at the statistics here. Yeah, so the average was still at only 67%, which is pretty low. The high scores were still, I mean, there were still plenty of high scores, so it's not that no one was able to do it. It's just that some people still seem to be struggling with the multiple choice. But it is considerably better. We're up almost 20% from the results on Module 1, so that's encouraging. Hopefully it will continue to get better. Let's see, so again, I'm looking for questions from the audience. It looks like there's at least some people who are watching live now. So please, if you have any questions about anything from Module 3, I'd be very happy to go over it. This is your review session. You tell me what the agenda is. While I wait, I'll look at some of the questions that people struggled with and maybe talk about some strategies for getting questions like that in the future correct. Okay, this is one that almost half of people who took this got wrong. So it says, according to Mill, it is impermissible and a violation of liberty for the state to ever tax substances like alcohol or drugs. Now, a lot of you said true to that, and I can see why you might think that it's true, because Mill does talk about how it's impermissible for the state to tax substances like alcohol or drugs in order to reduce their consumption, in order to make their consumption more expensive. But therein lies the key to getting questions like this right. If a question says that something is always the case or never the case, and according to such and such, and you can recall that that person said, this is wrong under these circumstances, it's very unlikely that it's true that what they were saying is that it's always or never, or one of these absolute kind of phrases. And the reason is because they wouldn't give that qualification if they meant to say that it's only some of the time. Or if they wouldn't give that qualification if they meant to say that it's always or never kind of situation. Because there'd be no point in qualifying, right? So when questions are asking you about always, never kind of scenarios, you need to be thinking, did the author qualify their argument in any way which might suggest that they don't just mean it's always this way or it's never that way, right? So that's just sort of a strategy for questions like this, because this sort of question is a comprehension question very clearly, where it's making sure that you understand that Mill has some nuance to his view, right? That he's not saying that it's always impermissible to ever tax substances like alcohol or drugs. It's impermissible when you're doing it for this reason, right? When you're doing it for paternalistic reasons. But if you're doing it in order to raise revenue, then that's perfectly fine. And Mill explicitly says that, right, in his discussion. Okay. So a lot of people struggle with the choose all that apply kind of questions. And I realize those are much more difficult questions than ones which are just asking for you to choose 1 out of 4. But there's a reason to do the choose all that apply, and that's to again, it's testing your comprehension, and it's testing your ability to distinguish how one person's view works from how other related views might work. So this is a great example of this. This is, which of the following is an argument that Mill makes in favor of the harm principle, choose all that apply? And a lot of people chose, people have a natural right to liberty within the limits of not harming others, right? And that's not right, because remember, Mill says explicitly at the beginning, in the intro, as a very important qualification for how all of his arguments are going to work, is that he's never going to appeal to natural rights of that kind, right? He's not going to do that. And the reason he didn't want to do that is he wanted to make an argument for utilitarians and for people who may not accept that we have a natural right to do such and such. He wants to argue just from the basis of what's going to be socially beneficial, right? So he wouldn't want to argue about natural rights because he doesn't, that's not the sort of argument he wants to engage in. That is a perfectly reasonable argument that you might make in favor of the harm principle, but it's not the kind that Mill would want to make, right? And so this is a question that's asking you to recall what Mill is trying to distinguish himself from, what other people who might agree with him, how he's different from them, right? Okay. I think those are the only questions that went really poorly. I guess this one too. Which of these situations or conditions does Dworkin say would justify paternalism or actions that very much resemble paternalism? Choose all that apply. And many of you chose the person is engaging in activities that an ideally rational actor would not engage in. And that's not right. Remember, Dworkin has a pretty significant discussion at the beginning of his positive proposals, I think. The section 6, I think, where he talks about this sort of way of reasoning, that, you know, maybe the right way to go about it is to say that anyone who's not acting the way that an ideally rational person would, we should interfere with them. And he says, we don't want to do that because if we do that, we're going to go overboard in our interferences in liberty, right? And so, again, this is Dworkin distinguishing himself from another person who might have argued up till then in a very similar way to him, because he wants to limit, he wants there to be room for paternalism, but to limit that in a way which doesn't allow for the government to regulate more and more parts of our lives. Right? And then a lot of you also said the person is taking risks which threaten their life. And again, Dworkin doesn't want to say this, and in fact probably no defender of paternalism wants to say this, because there are times when it's perfectly reasonable to take a risk which threatens your life, right? When you drive your car, you take a risk which threatens your life, right? You're choosing to do something which you could die from, right? If you're driving a car, you could die. There are tens of thousands of traffic fatalities every year, I think. So people die from driving cars. So driving a car is a risk which threatens your life. But that doesn't mean that it's the wrong choice, right? And paternalism is not about... It's not removing all risk from your life, right? That's not what paternalists of any stripe are trying to do. There is a right amount of risk to your life, right? And it's a balancing act with the other elements. Okay, so don't have any questions yet. Let me ask the chat in text. Okay, looks like we don't have any questions, so we'll end it here then. I should have the exam up by 3 p.m. today, and you'll have the usual until Monday at... actually, no, sorry, so I'm going to be extending it until Tuesday at 11:30 this time, because the upcoming Monday I will not be having lecture. We won't be having class on that Monday. We're going to push it back a day. I'm going to be out of town that day, and so I'm not going to be able to do my lecture as usual. So Monday is sort of an extra day for you to do readings for the next module or finish up this exam, whatever it is you want to do, because I will be out of town. So nothing new on Monday, and we'll push back everything until Tuesday. Okay? Alright, well, if you have any questions, if you come up with any, feel free to post them to the D2L discussion forums or email me. Keep in mind that it may take me a little bit of time to get back to you, so don't ask me at the last minute. And I encourage you not to take your exam at the last minute either, but yeah, feel free to email me at any time, and I'll get back to you when I can. Alright, thanks.